The mess hall is closing down for the night, and a jumpy Neelix is startled by 7 of 9. Hardly surprising, really, with all that suspenseful music playing. Maybe they should install a jukebox. He's jumpy because of a mysterious prior event, something related to what they're about to do, which is shutting down the warp core. That's also why 7's here. She wants someone to watch the Borgettes while she's off doing important things. The power loss will wake them from their recharging cycle, you see, and she hasn't told them what's going on because she doesn't want to alarm them. It must be some pretty serious shit if she thinks being unexpectedly awoken to find the ship without power is the less alarming of the two choices. I'm already on record for saying that you shouldn't keep secrets about important things from kids, but let's see where we're going with this. Up on the bridge, we're flying towards some space fog. Well, floating towards it. We've cut engines and are just coasting, presumably linked to the planned power outage. Janeway gives the word, and we cut all the lights, not just on the bridge, but throughout the ship, and the Doc turns himself off as well. Presumably the situation is serious enough for him to not use his mobile emitter. If Ramrod's face is anything to go by, then 7's attempt to prevent alarming the Borgettes is a disastrous failure. Or perhaps it's waking to find yourself faced with an ill-lit Neelix who tells you that everything's perfectly fine and then dodges all of your questions about what's happening. The problem with that, and one that Neelix should have seen coming after the same experience with Naomi, is that the Borgettes are smart enough to know he's full of shit. They also know a few things about ship operations, such as the fact that a section of Deck 12 is off-limits to everybody except senior staff. Mazzati says Naomi told her it's haunted, and after some needling, they all convince Neelix to tell them about what happened on Deck 12 through the medium of flashback. Calling it now, by the way, the big reveal at the end is going to be that he's making shit up to keep them occupied. Voyager's sitting in some space fog to refuel, though the fog doesn't seem impressed by our presence. There's a fair bit of shaking going on, something that's not delighting Neelix. Kim thinks it's being caused by some science bollocks, though the line doesn't ring true for Ramrod, and he interrupts the story to correct Neelix. He waves away the fact as unimportant and continues. That same lack of detail might explain why Janeway thinks we're taking on dilithium when we're actually here for deuterium. Regardless, Voyager being here is buggering up the space fog, so we're going to call it a day and scarp her before we make it worse. The fog has other ideas and hits us with some lightning. Or was it a ghost? No, it was lightning. Except it has left something on the hull. Maybe it was both, and Voyager's now being haunted by Emperor Palpatine. Mazzati's fully engaged with the story now, and Gin and Tonic are getting into the spirit of things as well. Yes, that was an intentional pun. 2, actually, as it's a ghost story. Your Patreon dollars at work. Ramrod's the voice of reason, suggesting that it was a life form that lived in the fog, causing a diversion among the Borgettes on what species it could have been. Stories about unexplained phenomena are a bit more difficult when the members of your audience each carry around a Borg database in their heads. Still, Neelix gets them back on track and starts again. The lightning's done more harm than we thought. Some systems are offline and there's a guy in sickbay, but Emperor Palpatine has made the mistake of fucking up Janeway's coffee. He may be a Dark Lord of the Sith, but I don't fancy his chances if that was deliberate. The faults keep piling up and now include steering, the engines, and the phone lines. Chakotay decides to go to engineering to find out what's going on, and in the face of acute ongoing ship-wide malfunctions, decides to take the lift. It's a bold choice, and one that plays out just as you'd expect, but he survives the process. When Chakotay finally gets to engineering, B'Elanna tells him she thinks she's found the problem, and they go off to give it a poke. They're not the only ones affecting repairs. This is incompetence, last seen a few episodes back in Good Shepherd. 7 pops over to say she's shit at her job and has caused problems in astrometrics. That's impressive, not least of which because incompetence has literally just arrived and not started any work at all. In fact, 7's the one fiddling with things when the lights start to flicker. And the problem B'Elanna said she'd found doesn't exist either, at least not here, not anymore. If it's Emperor Palpatine's ghost, then it's managing to move through the ship's circuits. It ends up in the cargo bay, which is now also occupied by 7. I guess she didn't go back to astrometrics after having a pop at incompetence. Equipment all around her goes on the fritz, and what looks like space fog starts pouring out of a vent. Attempts to escape take a turn for the worse when she discovers force fields blocking her in. The space fog and the possible Emperor Palpatine ghost it carries catches up to 7, and she has a bit of a nap while her facial augmentation fires off some lightning. Mazzati thinks this is when 7 was possessed and turned against the crew, but that's a bit much even for the tall tales of Neelix. A dead battery kills the lamp and makes us all wonder where the ambient lighting in a room without windows is coming from, but let's ignore that for now. Neelix doesn't panic, which is impressive for someone with nyctophobia, as we discovered in the premiere of Season 5, and changes the battery. Back to the story, and B'Elanna and Chakotay find Seven outside of her cargo bay. Disabling the force field doesn't work, so Chakotay poops yellow at the computer panel and they drag her to sickbay. I guess the space fog and lightning didn't affect them. The faults have reached the mess hall, and Kim orders everybody to their posts. Shockingly, they all listen to him and go, rather than ask who he is. Neelix tries to tag along to the bridge, but Kim tells him to get fucked. Fair play, son. Kim should have stayed in the mess hall. Shit's going south on the bridge, and after Paris takes some electricity to the face, they're all forced to leave due to an unfortunate lack of oxygen. Seven's alive at least, and once back on her feet, we all have a bit of a chat. What happened to her in the cargo bay, namely the space fog injecting itself into the ship, isn't an isolated incident, and it leaves Janeway thinking this might be a conscious entity trying to make Voyager more comfortable for it. We'll have to discuss it elsewhere. The dock goes offline before we can stick him in the mobile emitter, and we lose power to the sickbay in general. Janeway orders everybody out, but we aren't told where to. They're proving tough to find. Kim's first contact is with incompetence, or more accurately, with the case she swings at him. She's not seen anyone for hours, which is why she'd assumed that the ship had been boarded and attacked Kim on sight. Kim tries to calm her as they head for engineering, perhaps reveling in the rare opportunity for him to not be the least experienced person in the room. She's still got more character than him, though. As they make their way down to engineering, Neelix is still waiting in the mess hall and becoming increasingly jumpy. He's startled by Tuvok in a face mask, because they're the show's comedy double act, and this is the sort of thing they're legally obliged to do. Tuvok informs him and us of the facts to date. They've now concluded that Voyager's systems are being controlled by a life form, though we don't know if it's hostile, and we're all going to engineering while we sort it out. The travel includes a lot of Jeffries tubes and a lot of Neelix talking shite. When we get power back, I suspect Tuvok will be spending time in his murder simulator. The path is eventually blocked by some space fog, and Tuvok works to clear it by fiddling with a gizmo that's featured so regularly it should probably have its own listing in the credits. While they fuck about, we'll move to engineering. The Emperor Palpatine's space fog ghost is now inside the main computer, and trying to get it out will bugger up everything that's left on the ship. Lucky then that we won't need to. The ship's computer calls Janeway, and while Kim and B'Elanna assume it's just another malfunction, Janeway wonders if it's something more. Some science helps whatever's in the computer to talk more easily, and it tells Janeway to go to astrometrics. It even gives her some air to breathe, so that was nice of it. Janeway takes Seven along too, possibly because she hasn't had many lines yet. Emperor Palpatine's ghost shows us a picture of the space fog we were in when everything started going to shit, and Janeway draws the obvious conclusion. It wants to go home. Seven suggests this may be an invasion plan, but that doesn't make any sense. There was nothing to stop other space fog ghosts from entering at the same time as this one, so Janeway's inclined to believe it. It even gives us back control of the steering wheel, but we'll only let Janeway up to the bridge to use it. That means she's alone when she learns the bad news. Whatever we did to the space fog earlier didn't stop when we left, and now there's none left to deposit Emperor Palpatine's ghost in. The Dark Lord of the Sith is a bit miffed, to say the least. It turns off life support for all decks and kabooms the steering while telling Janeway to abandon ship. It also spits some lightning at Tuvok and starts filling the Jeffries tubes with space fog. Janeway tries to reason with it while she walks down an indeterminate corridor. Taking the ship is all well and good, but the whole thing is starting to fall apart because of the faults that Emperor Palpatine's ghost has caused. It won't be long before Voyager just stops working. Emperor Palpatine's ghost isn't ready to listen, so she goes down to engineering and tells everybody to get to escape pods just as Neelix and Tuvok arrive. We all sod off to do some abandoning shipping, except for Janeway, who has the door slammed in her face. Emperor Palpatine's ghost has done the maths, and now agrees that the whole ship is shagged if someone doesn't start repairs. And the person it's chosen is Janeway. She tells it to go fuck itself, and a bit of threatening doesn't change her mind. Just before she carks it, while an oxygen mask hangs from her neck, Emperor Palpatine's ghost decides that this is a fucking awful plan and changes its mind. All power is restored, and we're given full control of the ship again. It took a few days to collect all of the evacuated crew, says Neelix, which seems odd when they only just ejected, but what do I know? I guess the teleporters and tractor beams must have still been offline. And Emperor Palpatine's ghost has been living on Voyager ever since, the titular haunter of Deck 12, waiting for another space fog of the same type to live in. Just like the one we're in now, in fact. A bit of shaking in the cargo hold is followed by the lights coming back on. As Neelix ushers them back to bed, the Borgets wonder with some apprehension if the ghost has truly left. Not to worry, Neelix says, as he made the whole thing up, causing them to claim that they knew this from the inconsistencies, and I realised that my original guess was wrong. The reveal isn't that he made it up, it's going to be that he didn't. Up on the bridge, Neelix reports that the Borgets are fine, and inquires if everything went to plan. We're shown the space fog, sporting the sort of random flashes you'd expect to see from lightning, and we leave Emperor Palpatine's ghost to settle into their new home as we fly away. There are a handful of minor continuity things to get out of the way before we move to the interesting stuff. Nothing important, but, well, we're here for the nitpicking, aren't we? The most glaring, perhaps, is a lack of reference to Neelix's nyctophobia, or fear of the dark. It was a whole thing in the Season 5 premiere, so it's odd for there to not be a single nod to it here, even if only to explain that he's been treated by the doc or something. Another medical one is a line from Tuvok. He tells Neelix to envision your lungs filled with light. Odd that Tuvok doesn't remember Neelix only has one of them, and even odder that Neelix wouldn't correct it on retelling the story. The last is to do with a regularly used external shot of the ship. That's all well and good normally, but it doesn't work in this instance because it shows fully illuminated windows, despite there being widespread power cuts. They're all relatively minor though, so let's get to the interesting bits. First off, Neelix tells Seven when he's given the job of looking after the Borgets that he's uncomfortable with lying to them. We're nodding to the lesson he learned after his disastrous mishandling of the Naomi situation, I suspect. Here, he's told to keep them entertained without sharing the reality of the situation, and sidesteps the ethical issues of both by making the whole story somewhat nebulous. And yes, that's 2 fucking puns you've had from me today. Seven would probably still be pissed at learning what he did, but he's managed to go against her wishes and retain plausible deniability, which I think is quite impressive. Not bad for a plot point that I'd originally expected to be entirely disposable. Next is something we've touched on before a couple of times in a few different ways. Neelix arranging crates and containers to sit on raises the topic again, namely that these kids have no place that's truly theirs. No private area to simply rest or socialise amongst themselves. All of their leisure time must be spent in public areas. We could probably have a discussion over whether that's preferable for them, a certain subconscious familiarity with Borg existence, but not having the choice feels very off to me. Keeping this area as storage was questionable enough when it was only Seven who lived here. Now that it's been turned into the post-Borg boarding house, that lack of privacy and personalization is all the more starkly at odds with the Federation's enlightened ways. Perhaps of the most interest to me this episode was the interaction between the Borgets and Neelix while he retold the story. They pick holes and flaws in the details, such as Ramrod suggesting that Seven should have used her brainial implant to try and contact the bridge. I heard that and wondered to myself, is this aimed at me? Is this an intentional analogy of Star Trek or other entertainment, a deliberate nod to those like myself who poke at plot holes? Are we saying that writers are Neelix trying to do the best they can with limited resources and time, all while multiple voices point out the flaws? I guess you could view this as condescending being equated to chattering children, but I confess I kind of like it. It plugs into what I've said previously about how a fandom sometimes needs to collectively step back and look at their own actions. There's a reason these videos were originally titled as being reviewed by an arsehole. It's easy to poke holes and far harder to patch them. The name was intended to remind both the viewer and myself of this fact. There's also the idea that even when things don't go perfectly, the act of providing entertainment is its own reward, and how a good story can overcome its flaws. Neelix's retelling is far from perfect, but it keeps the Borgets engaged regardless. Is this an analysis of writers and fandom? There's no role for a storyteller without an audience, but at the cost of criticism, and there's no role for an audience without a storyteller, but at the cost of suspending disbelief. Is this intended as a lesson on how the healthiest fandoms find a balance of the two, or am I simply overthinking again? And does that even matter as long as we arrive at something worth thinking about? The main thrust of the episode, of course, is the very nature of scary stories and their appeal. There's a reason why fairy tales, essentially horror stories for kids, are some of the most enduring pieces of fiction for our species. They enable us at a young age to grapple with the concept of fear in a safe environment, basically roller coasters constructed from words. Kids can be gruesome, they can go to dark places. That's normal and natural and healthy, a way of exploring the world and trying to understand it. It's probably best crystallized here in a line from Mazzotti. Neelix's diversion into the story of a freighter gives the Borgettes something to chew on, and results in her proposing that they resorted to cannibalism. I'm going to give points to whoever decided on including that specific line, as I suspect it wasn't without a bit of a fight. Voyager was meant to be a family show for the most part, and I imagine talk about eating people coming from a kid wasn't an easy sell. But the morbid and the taboo are perfectly natural places for a young mind to wander, and I think denying that in an episode specifically about exploring fear would have been a disservice. To be honest, a few minutes into this one had left me expecting to dismiss it. While it's not going to be on any top 10 lists, I was pleasantly surprised by the way it was handled and the things it touched upon. Sometimes a good Star Trek story is just one that does things a little differently. End of episode.
You know how we're killing an admiral, because we can't figure out a way to fuck up Paris.
Yeah?
Guess who's been put in charge of taking care of the admiral?
Are you shitting me?
Nope. If the admiral buys it, Paris gets the blame.
Oh my god, this is perfect. We just have to keep him occupied. No danger, no risk of injury.
We can tell him Bellana's waiting in their quarters to do a sex or something, and get Neelix to start one of his awful stories to keep the admiral in here, while the rest of the group leaves.
Then we just have to murderize him. We'll have to improvise that bit. If there's a tour on, Tuvok will be too busy to watch the security stuff. We can off him before they even know it's happening. This is gonna be brilliant. Woof.